Hello and welcome to this C&D Peace Education video where we're going to be learning about the symbol of the peace crane, where it came from, and the story of an inspirational atomic bomb survivor. We're also going to be making our own peace cranes as we go throughout the video, so if you haven't already, make sure that you have a square bit of paper. I actually made this from an A5 bit of paper, which I cut the end off of. And before we begin the story, the first thing that we're going to do is simply fold our piece of paper in half to make a long rectangle so that when you open it up you can see a crease down the middle of the white side. We're then going to open it up so it's a large white square and then fold it in half again, this time the other way. So we're making a broad rectangle so that when we open it up we've got a cross in the middle. So although the peace crane has been a symbol in Japan for an incredibly long time, our story is going to begin in 1945. At this time, Japan and the USA were fighting in World War II. Japan had attacked the US, who was an ally of the UK, who was already involved in the war, and they did so with a surprise attack on a Hawaiian naval base called Pearl Harbor. This brought America into the war, declaring Japan its enemy, and so the two became quite bitter rivals as they kept fighting the war even after it had finished in Europe. The USA had already for some time been working on a nuclear program to try and develop a nuclear weapon, and they did this in partnership with the UK. They were scared that Nazi Germany would develop a nuclear weapon before them. Japan had been fighting very hard in the war as well. They were trying to build a kind of empire. The Manhattan Project was a secret project between the USA and the UK where they sought to develop the most destructive weapons that humans could create. They were ultimately successful and they did their first nuclear tests in the deserts of America. So the first bombs were exploded on American land, but later they would be used in conflict against the Japanese. Let's go back to our paper though. We've got a cross here in the middle, but lie it flat on the table. This time we're going to fold a triangle. So we're still folding it in half, but this time from corner to corner rather from edge to edge. And we're going to do that twice. However, the second time you do it, flip it over and make sure that the coloured side or the opposite side is facing upwards. This will help with the next step that we do. And once you're finished with that, when you open up your paper, you should have 4 lines that cross in the middle in a kind of Union Jack shape. Now you'll find that once you've done this, your paper is standing up by itself. If, like me, you've got the white side facing up, you'll see what's called a mountain fold. Press now right in the middle of your paper and you'll find that it pops. And then from here you can take the 2 opposite sides into the middle, press each side here also into the middle until it lies flat in the shape of a diamond. As we've said, the Manhattan Project was successful in splitting the atom, creating a nuclear chain reaction leading to a large explosion. This is very different from a regular bomb, which will explode by burning. A nuclear weapon literally splits material apart from the inside out, and therefore it can be a much larger explosion. It was decided by then US President Harry Truman that the bombs would in fact be used against Japan. They had a list of possible targets that they could drop these bombs on, and in their mind they wanted to use them to cause as much destruction as possible in a bid to end the war. Although some historical sources say that the war could have ended by other means, Japan was already very weak at the time, for example, in terms of their military strength. Winston Churchill consented on behalf of the UK to drop the bombs against Japan, and they fell in early August, first on the 6th of August on the city of Hiroshima, and then again on the 9th of August, just 3 days later, on the city of Nagasaki. So have a look at the diamond that you've just created. What we're going to do now is fold the sides of the diamond up along the middle seam that we created earlier, and by pressing down we're going to produce a little triangle shape. We're then going to do that on the other side as well, so that we kind of get the impression of a kite, and the folds that we've made are perfectly symmetrical. And once you have a shape like this, turn it over directly on your table, and we're going to repeat that step again. So, folding the edges in, along to the middle line, and then doing the same on the other side. And what we'll end up with is something that is shaped like a rhombus or a kite. And once you have your kite shape, we're going to fold this upper triangle, what you might see as the ice cream in the cone, backwards and forwards, creating a seam that's going to help us with the step afterwards. Now for the rest of our story, we're going to focus on the city of Hiroshima, which was the first city to be bombed by a nuclear weapon. A single US plane flew over the city very early in the morning. A lot of military planes often flew over Hiroshima, but they didn't drop any bombs. At 8:15 in the morning, the bomb was dropped, and because of a lot of timers in the bomb that also measured elevation, how high it was in the air, the explosion could be controlled so that it exploded above the city, causing maximum damage as the blast went downwards rather than just outwards. And in just a matter of seconds, the entire city was destroyed, taking with it many tens of thousands, perhaps, according to some sources, hundreds of thousands of people in an instant. Libraries were destroyed, schools, hospitals, workplaces. In fact, the whole city was completely leveled to the ground. When a nuclear weapon explodes, it reaches sun-like temperatures. That's because when scientists made the bomb, they were able to reproduce a similar reaction to that which happens in the sun itself. This means that anybody who was caught very, very close to the blast wasn't just simply burned by the heat, their body actually turned into gas, like water on a hot pan. In less than a second, thousands and thousands of people would have lost their lives just in the city centre alone, whether by being vaporised, crushed by buildings, or burnt by flames. People even further out from the epicentre would have also been affected and ultimately lost their lives. An air blast caused by the explosion would have moved for kilometres throughout the city, destroying buildings wherever it went. The heat and the smoke together would rise to create a massive mushroom cloud, and the winds created that formed the cloud would also have fanned the flames of fire. According to eyewitness accounts, those who hadn't died immediately but were still caught in the flames could be found running around with extremely bad burns or wounds on their body, and they were trying to get to the river to alleviate the pain of the heat. On the morning of the 6th of August, Hiroshima was completely destroyed. It was erased from the earth. And although it's rebuilt and standing today and does loads of amazing peace activism, it's important that we remember it took just two leaders, Truman and Churchill, to sign off on this bombing. Let's return to our peace crane in the making. We've already folded the top. The next step is somewhat fiddly. So what we're going to do is open the flaps on one side that we've already created, and using the crease that we created in the previous step, we're going to lift up one sheet of paper and kind of pivot it over the top. You'll find that your crane opens a bit like a canoe boat, and at that point move your hands to the side and press them down, so we get another large diamond shape. As you'll probably guess, we're going to turn this over and do exactly the same on the other side. Remember to keep your fingers pressed down towards the top of the diamond so that you can use the crease that we've made as a pivot. And once you've managed to do that, you'll end up with a shape like this. Now it's important to recognise that there are these little loose bits, which I like to call legs when we run these origami workshops. Make sure the legs are closest to you as we go forward. We're just going to be focusing now on one survivor's account of the bombing, their story, and actually a lot of people did survive the bombings at both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They still work today, a lot of them at least, for anti-nuclear activism, trying to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used in this way again. And whilst there were a lot of survivors, estimates for the death toll in Hiroshima and Nagasaki together, the two bombings, range all the way up to 600,000. Sadako Sasaki lived with her family in the city of Hiroshima, and she was just 2 years old when the bomb fell. As the shockwave raced through the city, destroying buildings as it went, Sadako's family home was also hit. The shockwave was so strong that she was sent flying backwards out of the window and onto the hard floor below. But miraculously, she managed to survive with very few injuries. And a lot of Sadako's family also survived the explosion. They actually stayed around as the city of Hiroshima was being rebuilt, and Sadako eventually went to school there. Despite Japan being incredibly under-resourced once they'd surrendered from the war, that was about a month after the two bombs dropped, Sadako had a very happy childhood. Sadako was really active at school. In fact, her favourite sport was running. She had lots of friends growing up, but when she was around 12, so in year 6 or year 7 in the UK schooling system, she found that she couldn't run so well anymore. She was actually developing a lot of pain. She became incredibly ill, and she had to go to the doctors. Let's return to our crane. You're going to make sure that those legs are closest to you, and we're going to do a fold that's a bit similar to the one that we did earlier. We're going to fold the sides in so that the edge lines up with the middle, and we're effectively thinning out the kite shape that we've got in front of us. We're going to do that 4 times overall, so twice on one side, then turn it over so it lies flat on the table, and twice again. And once we've done that, we're going to do something that's relatively fiddly. It's called a book fold. We're going to draw up each side of the crane, making sure that our folds remain in the middle, pressed up against each other. You'll get something that's a bit like a handle of a paper aeroplane. Using that handle, you can then turn the crane over and do the same on the other side. So it's like we're closing the pages of a book twice. The reason that Sadako is becoming so poorly is because she'd been exposed to something called radiation, which is a unique impact of a nuclear weapon. Because a nuclear weapon uses radioactive material, uranium or plutonium, that means that radioactivity is spread not just in the blast, but also in all the debris that's lifted up from the city that creates the mushroom cloud. All of the radioactive dust that's produced by the explosion, by destroying a city along with radioactive material, is lifted up into the atmosphere by the mushroom cloud produced. It can then travel much, much further and fall again as what's called black rain. This meant that lots of parts around the city of Hiroshima, and even further still, were exposed to the impacts of radiation, which can make people become very sick very quickly. This is also one of the ways that many people died following the explosions, whether that's after a few days, or after a few weeks, months or years. Because of Sadako's exposure to this kind of radiation, the doctors told her that she'd contracted a disease called leukemia, which is a kind of cancer in the blood. Although many people today survive leukemia, at the time it was an extremely serious condition, so Sadako had to spend many months in hospital. Her father reminded her of a Japanese legend which promises that if you fold 1,000 peace cranes, you'll be granted a wish. Sadako began folding peace cranes. Her friends and family would bring her scraps of paper that they would find lying around. Because paper wasn't very cheap at the time, she'd use things as small as sweet wrappers, just to make an incredibly tiny paper crane. Through this process, she was able to focus her mind on something simple and peaceful, and working towards earning herself a wish. Some people think that maybe she wished to get better. Some people think that she wished for the prosperity of her family, and other people say maybe Sadako was wishing for something even bigger, for this never to happen again and for there to be peace in the world. Look down at your crane now. Now the larger triangle that's pointing towards you, we're simply going to fold that halfway up, so that all of the pointy ends of our paper are facing the top, so you'll have to do this twice. And once you've made it there, we're repeating the book fold that we did just a minute ago. So we're lifting up each opposite edge of the paper together in the middle on both sides before pressing it flat on the desk. Now remember, this is exactly the same thing that Sadako did, and she actually did it not just 1,000 times. She didn't just earn her wish, she actually ended up making up to 1,600 paper cranes. And the reason that some people think Sadako might not have wished to get better is because she ultimately and unfortunately passed away from leukemia. Her story began to travel not just through Japan, but internationally, the story of a young person doing a simple act for peace. At Sadako's funeral, family, friends and loved ones all laid paper cranes down on her casket. And what's more, 75 years after the bombings, people are still making and sending peace cranes to Hiroshima to remember the bombings and say, never again. Every fortnight, the Hiroshima Peace Park has to empty the display cabinets they have, featuring paper cranes, and refill them again with all of the new cranes that they've received. What started as a simple act, making a peace crane, has spread around the world. So with that in mind, let's finish our peace crane. The first thing you're going to want to do is simply fold down one large bit of paper, about halfway. This is going to be your wing, and then we'll do that on the other side as well. Next, gently pull out each of the remaining upward spikes, if you like. This is going to be your head and your tail. At this point, you can choose which side you'd like to be your head and make a small fold at the top. It'll look something like this. And with all of that done, one last thing I like to do is simply pull on the wings a little bit to get the crane to open up. It should then stand up all by itself and you'll have made your very own peace crane. So there you have it. We've learned about nuclear weapons when they were first used against Japan, the story of Sadako Sasaki, and how to make a peace crane. Going forward, put this crane on display, try and share the story of Sadako with somebody that you know. You might even be able to teach them how to make their very own peace crane, and then maybe they can pass on the story as well. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure that you check out www.cnduk.org/education, where we'll have lots of more resources for you to learn about nuclear history and nuclear issues.